Hey everybody, welcome back. I want to do a video for our jncia study, and I want to talk about the Juniper operating system. Now, Juniper was founded in 1996, and they came out with their first router. I think it was the M40 router in 1998, and it was running Juniper's operating system. I think it was version 3.0 way back then. I had never worked on that, but I did a little bit of research and found out that that was one of the earliest versions of Junos. Now, today, in the year 2021, Junos is up to version 21. Is that coincidental? We're in the year 2021 and it's Junos 21? No, it's not coincidental at all. So over the years, Juniper started making their operating system coincide with the year. Okay, so for instance, Junos version 17 came out in 2017. All right, so let's look over here in the lab. I have a more extensive lab from another study track I'm doing in another one of my playlists, but I'm just going to use one of my EVNG Juniper routers as an example. You can type show version on a Juniper router and you get an extensive version output. So it tells you the host name, it tells you the model of the router, and in this case it's a virtual MX software emulated Juniper router, and it's running Juniper's Junos 17.4R1.16. So this first number is the main release number, and so that came out in the year 2017. After that, it shows a lot of its capabilities and submodules that are running in this version of software. Okay, if I keep going through here, it shows a variety of information about that build of Junos. If we type show system information, it's a more abbreviated output of a show version command. You just get the model, the family, the version of software, and the host name. Now, if we take our example here, 17.4R1.16, and we put it in our, I put it in a notepad here to explain what these different fields are. So if you look on Juniper's website, you'll find these letters M.N, Z, B.S, as they use them as placeholders to explain these different fields like M and N and Z. And so M is the first field. In our case, it is 17 dot. And what that is it's the main release number of the Junos product. The N is the minor release number. In our case, it's 4 dot. Okay? And what the deal is with that is that, like I said, the 17 is the year 2017. The minor release represents what they call a semester or a quarter of the year. So if it was 17.1, it was released in 2017 within the first quarter, January, February, or March. Okay, then if it was 17.2, that would have been Q2 of 2017. Q4, quarter 4, October, November, December, is when 17.4 was released. Okay, so that is those first two fields, the M and the N, 17.4. The letter Z that's shown there is what is known as an FRS or a maintenance release. Now it's signified by an R. Now there's a lot of different fields that can show up in that placeholder Z, and we will get to those details in a moment. So the next field, the letter B, has something to also do with the letter Z. So in our example, the letter Z is a placeholder for R, which is a FRS or maintenance release. And the number 1 signifies, is it in fact the FRS or is it a maintenance release? And what do I mean by that? What I mean is the letter R with a 1 after it means it's the FRS. It's the first revenue shipment or the first release shipment of that version of software, 17.4. Okay, Now, if it was 17.4, and I meant 17.4R1, it's the first one, there's been no maintenance release fixes in that train of code. If it was 17.4R2, the 2 means it's the first release of bug fixes, and it means that it's the first maintenance release. Okay, so even though it's a R2, the number 2 incremented means it's the first maintenance release. All right? So be leery of 17.4R1 because there could be some bugs that have yet to be fixed. R2 should be a bit more solid. Some bugs have been discovered and fixed. R3 even more so. R4 even more than that. All right, so the more you get into maintenance releases, the more bugs have been worked out and fixed. Okay, so if you need 17.4 code because it has feature sets that you need on the platform that you're installing it on, then it would behoove you to go after R3 or look for R4 because it's going to be a more solid, tried and true version of Junos. All right? And then let's look back over here. The .16 number is a spin number. And I'll just quote Juniper down here. The reason why the spin number is there is during quality assurance testing before releasing the image, some issues may be found and addressed before release. Every time when a new build of the same release is compiled, the new build will get its respin number increased by 1. In the end, only the final respin is officially released. For this reason, the specific respin number can be considered irrelevant and disregarded for official public Junos release. So that last decimal number, like .16, is a respin or recompilation number. That's pretty much irrelevant from what I understand from what the Juniper website is saying. Now, there's a number that can show up between there. All right, so in this case, we have our 17.4R1.16 version. Well, there's a number that could show up in the middle there, 17.4R1-S2.16. That -S2 signifies a service release, and it in this case, in my example, it would be the second service release fix. Okay, so the service release is something that is fixed along the way to solve a problem in the code. And in my experience, when the JTAC has been working with me on a problem, the Juniper Technical Assistance Center, they may determine, hey, you need to download 17.4R3-S3 version of software. Okay, and so they're suggesting that because it's fixing a specific problem. All right, so let's get back over there and want to talk a little bit about what I mentioned earlier. This Z indicator in our example is an R, but Z can take on a variety of options. It can be an R or an F or a B or an I or an S or an X. So the R is the first revenue or release shipment. Also a maintenance release if it's a number greater than 2 following the R. And that's the most general type of software that you'll use. If that's a letter B in this placeholder value here where we have the letter Z, if that's actually a letter B, then it's a beta release for beta testing. If it's an I, it's an internal software release for private. It's a private release for some specific reason that they might cut a version of software for a customer. Okay. If it's an S release, it's to solve a specific problem. And if it's an X version, then it's a special exception release of software that also solves a particular problem for a customer. And interestingly, when it's an X release, it's for the customer, it fixes a certain problem on a platform, but the customer is expected to upgrade to a more traditional version of Junos, and I'll explain what I mean by that, at a later time when a more traditional version of Junos becomes available for that platform. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that X release. Now, I have a couple examples here. The SRX and even the ACX platform I've seen have specific X releases. So here's a couple different X release versions and how they would appear. So again, the X release is a special exception release. And in the numbering, let's take this one for instance, 15.1x54. Those numbers are analogous to, for instance, the major and the minor release of, for instance, 17.1. Okay, that whole number, 15.1x54, would be similar to a more traditional Junos numbering system of like 17.1. Now, the -D61 suffix after that designates a specific release, and it's analogous to an AR type of release, like R1 type of numbering. Now, that would be the first release of that software. All right? That would be R1. Now, in our case, D61, I'm going to have to get more specific with that, but for instance, D10, I'll have to explain what D61 would signify later. But if it said D10, for instance, if this was actually D10, then that in fact is the first release of that version of software. D15 is the second release, which is actually the first maintenance release. D20 would be the third release, but is actually the second maintenance release. So do you see what's going on here? It's incrementing by 5, and the first one starts at D10, the second one is D15, the third one is D20. It's incrementing by 5. This was true during earlier versions of the X type of software, like in 12.1x, we were incrementing by 5 for each maintenance release, starting at a base of D10. Now, in later X releases, for instance, 15.1x, the first release is D10, and then it increments by 10 for follow-on maintenance releases. So the first maintenance release would be D20, the second maintenance release would be D30. Now, if there's a software release between maintenance releases, then that's where you get an increment of, for instance, D11 or D12 or D13, etc. Okay? So in our case, in our example I showed earlier, the D61, that would be the fifth maintenance release if we count it up starting at D10, D20, D30, D40, D50, D60, and then there was a release of code following that maintenance release of D60 to be indicated by a 1. So D61 would be a version of software that was released after that fifth maintenance release. And again, we have the last and final number, in this case, dot 6, would indicate the sixth respin of this version of Junos. All right? And so again, that respin is a recompilation of the code, and it's fairly insignificant according to Juniper. All right? So this is an explanation of the numbering of the version of Junos code that you might find running on one of your platforms. Now, if you go to juniper.net and you go to support, downloads, you can type in here MX240. Let's look at the MX240 router. And here's where you would find the version. So 21.1 indicates the year 2021 and the first quarter or the first semester of the year 2021. Okay, so that's the version that's available for the MX240 router. Look at this. We have 4 semesters or quarters of the year 2020 software. 4321, the year 2019, 4321, the year 2018, 4321, and the same for the year 2017. But earlier, they weren't doing 4 releases. In the year 2016, they only did 2 for this platform. The year 2015, there's only 1. And so we can see that it's not always 4 releases for every year, signifying the quarter of that year. Sometimes it can vary. Okay. Also, this is where you would select Junos right here. It's pre-selected. If you needed an S release that I was talking to you about, where you see that where we talked about this S release, in this case -S2, well, that's where you can find it. You find it right here in the Junos SR. So you click that Junos SR release, and then you find some SR releases listed here. Notice there's not one for 2021. So let me go back to that. If you select Junos, look at these releases. In the release column, you have different types. Now it's all the same release number, but there's different versions or different types of Junos, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Watch this release column when I change this to Junos SR. So now we see our increment of the SR type of code. So for 20.4R1, we have -S1. Now if we click here, let's go to 20.3. For 20.3, we also have 20.3R1-S1. I'm going to keep looking here. So for 20.2, so the second semester or the second quarter of the year 2020, we had an S3 release, we had an S2 release, and we had an S1 release. All right? So some of the things you'll want to look for and how to look for them when you're hunting for the right version of software that you know you need. And so this is how you'd go about finding it. Now let me mention these column headings. Install package, install media. Okay, let me blow this up. You can blow up install media, and you're going to see something very similar to install package. So which one do you download? Well, the install package is the one that you can use for transferring this over the network. For instance, using file transfer protocol, FTP, or secure copy, SCP. You're going to want the install package. Okay? So what is the install media? Well, that is if you need to copy this version of Junos onto a USB stick, and you need to carry that USB stick over to a router and plug it into a USB port and upgrade the software via a universal serial bus drive, a USB thumb drive. That's when you would download the install media. All right, so that's the difference between those. If you're going to do an over-the-network install, you're going to want the install package. Okay, now within these groupings, for instance, within install package, you have all these different versions here. All right, and so what I want you to see is the version that a few of the versions that I've been told not to use is the one that's limited Okay, so the one that's limited does not allow for secure shell or secure copy. So you won't want that one. And the one that says net, VM host net, you're not going to want that one, as it is for Pixie boot. Unless, of course, you need Pixie boot version of Junos. So if you need to take a version of Junos software, put it on a Pixie boot server, maybe in a data center environment where there's a server there and you have multiple routers that need to be able to boot off the network, download that version of Junos via Pixie boot, then that's the one you would want. But under normal circumstances, you won't want that one. And so the one that I normally use is the one that has a name like this, VM host 64-bit. That 64-bit is usually the next generation routing engine. VM host means there's a virtual machine layer, and so you use the upgrade command that indicates VM host. And so that's the version that I usually go with. There's a few other versions here on the website that you might need to get familiar with if you're looking for something else. And so there we have it, an overview on Juniper's Junos operating system. The version numbers, the letters, what they stand for, some of those fields that seem to look kind of cryptic, and you know, how to decipher them, where to go on the website, how to download that stuff, and you know, where to find your S releases and things like that. So I hope this served as a nice overview, a nice introduction to the Juniper naming conventions and the numbering and all that. And if you want to get notified when I upload new videos, subscribe, turn on notifications, give me a comment. Let me know how this content is working out for you. And if you would like something else to help with your jncia-junos pursuit, share it with somebody that you think might be able to benefit from this. And I appreciate it. Until next time, we'll see you later.